So today we're continuing on Revelation 17, which is a good one. They're all good. Some of them seem to have a little bit more meat than others, but it depends on the subject that's being read or discussed. So I'm John. That's my wife, Lisa, the class administrator, chief prayer, and all-around great gal. I thought I'd put up something she sent me. It's kind of blurry. The image is not great, but I stretched it out, but who knows? Anyway, you get the gist of it. Just from the topic we were discussing in the last few weeks, there's this big movement for transhumanism, and three of the major proponents of it are Elon Musk, Yuval Harari, and Klaus Schwab. Each of them have a different emphasis, but if you haven't heard those names, you may hear them in the future. Elon Musk, I know you've heard of, but anyway, essentially what it amounts to is that they're gung-ho and putting the chip in your brain and linking you to the internet. And as Mr. Harari says, you will then become a god. So that is the aim and point they're going for. Um, hmm, just so you don't think this is a few oddball nuts out there. These are each very powerful people. Musk is the richest man in the world. Klaus Schwab is extremely wealthy, and he's a German, so he's putting forth a lot of things in the World Economic Forum. A lot of big political leaders have gone to that and are part of that. But the whole bottom line here is that they're viewing what's happening with AI as the fourth industrial revolution, and it will lead us into a fusion of our physical, digital, and biological identity. Well, that's what the mark is, basically. So they're not using prophetic Bible language. They're just secular atheists. As far as I know, they're all atheists or agnostics. So interesting, just to show you that, when you're talking Bible prophecy and I am trying to explain the things that are coming, that this is where they want us to head. You know, you say, well, what does that matter? Well, I think it was maybe in 1933, somewhere in there, maybe earlier. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf while he was in prison. He detailed out exactly what he was going to do. And so years later, guess what? It happened exactly as he said it was going to happen. That's because demonic spirits who had envisioned this had propelled him according to this vision, and they empowered him. So that's where we're headed. The Bible predicts all this. God's already seen it. No use to be apprehensive. Um, we don't supposed to become preppers, by the way. If you want to prepare, that's fine for whatever, hurricanes and everything else we do. But the idea is that Jesus said, take no thought of tomorrow. So the idea that, we're going to go live underground and live through all this is patently nonsense. So don't fall prey to that. So we know where we are now. You watch the news, we see where the world is, you know what's happened in your lifetime. And that's the last slide was the vision that these world leaders want to take us in, the Bible predicts, just to give you a quick understanding of where we come from. And what I mean by that is everything was eliminated at the flood. And by the way, they do have a great amount of evidence for the flood. The overall scientific community, evolutionists, of course, discount it, but there is evidence if you want to look into it. And to me, the greatest evidence is that everything started from Mount Ararat, where the ark landed, and proceeded. In other words, if you look, scientists, whatever, sociologists, archaeologists, anthropologists, they'll tell you that, about the time that the ark would have landed on Mount Ararat and in the following years, that civilization arose in Sumeria. Sumeria is the area which we call the Babylonian area, Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. So it's just logical as you think about it. In other words, the first real civilization sprang up from nothing, and it sprang up in that area. Sumerians were the first real civilization. And it's like, okay, that we went from like, basically cavemen, advanced apes, with maybe spears if we're lucky, or stone knives or whatever. And then all of a sudden, after so-called millions of years, civilization just sprang up and it was just full and all there out of nowhere. Well, of course, that's nonsense. What happened is that there was a tremendous civilization before the flood, and they were very advanced, that the demons and well, not the demons, but the fallen angels had given them a lot of knowledge, as the Bible teaches in Genesis 6. And when the ark came to land on Mount Ararat, I personally believe they're still going to find it there. We don't have anything conclusive, but I believe that they're going to find it. Oh, and by the way, they've recently uh, decoded or understood the world map, which is the Imago Mundo, and it's in the ancient language of Babylon, and it actually, now that they've decoded it, shows the exact location of the Ark. And this was like 2,600, 3,000 years ago, this tablet was made, and it gives the exact location and how to get to the Ark. So it's like, oh, that's all mythology. Well, somebody should have informed the Babylonian government, scribes, and intelligent people at that time, because it's if you want to look that up, you can just say the Babylonian world map. That's English for it. But at any rate, so when it landed up there, they spread out, and they spread out like we would today. There's no magic going on. Some of them went north, east, west, and south. The problem is the ones that went north realized pretty quickly that it was cold and inhospitable. So not many people went north. They went east, they went west, and most of them went south. The easiest route was directly down into the Mesopotamian Valley, where it was very hot. In fact, today we call that summer, which I believe came from the word Sumer. So the Sumerians, or the Summer Aryans, were the people that went where it's hot all the time, eat lots of water and easy to grow crops, just like we would today. They weren't stupid. So they ended up settling there, and some of them also went across the Fertile Crescent, Levant, down into Egypt, and they started another civilization. All those Sumerians were the first. Whole idea is to say that people all spread from there, and all of civilization and everything we have now arose at that time, from the time the ark landed until now. And then from there, of course, we went to the whole world. So that's where we came from. So God knew all this was going to happen, and He gave us the whole vista of history. And it's interesting to see that now at the very end times, we see that the world leaders are getting us back to one world. Remember, shortly after they founded the government in Babylon area, they built the tower, and then all the languages were confused. So now, for the first time in history, men like Schwab and the rest of them want a one world government. We're going back to the tower. And with AI, I've just recently seen several pieces. I've done it on my phone. My Spanish is not great, and I use my phone to translate. One of the people who was working on my house, they were doing painting for me, and I translated for them my English into Spanish and Spanish into English. You can do that right now. But I mean, it's coming where it's just going to be built into your phone. You don't have to do anything. Speaking to my phone, it's going to immediately give you Spanish to English or English to Spanish, etc. So what is that called? That's called the reversal of the Tower of Babel. So everything that started out and was in the past, which was lost or scattered or stymied in a sense, is all coming back together. So the end will be like the beginning. The beginning will be like the end. And so what we're going to have is the reversal of the Tower of Babel. And going on, we're going to look at further aspects of this. Chapter 17 we're talking about the religious system. So in the Sumerian area, in the Egyptian area, some of the very first religions, and those religions came from the stories that Noah brought, no doubt. In other words, before the flood, the uh, the uh, the giants who were the Nephilim, the hybrid children of the angels and men. Don't ask me how that happened. Who knows? But that's why they became so what should I say, legendary. They became the legend. So when later on they gave them different names, like in Egypt, Isis, Horus, Osiris, those were just names, the new names for the old gods they invented in pre-flood times, antediluvian times. So this religion then spread throughout the entire world. And this religion is the ancient Egyptian Babylonian religion, and it's the religion of one world. In other words, back then they had one world and one religion. And I'm not saying Noah didn't teach them these things. I mean, they heard firsthand the accounts of the times. Keep in mind, he had lived hundreds of years before the ark landed, and he had the knowledge. He personally would have known and talked to Methuselah, who was the oldest living person. And all the all these people of the history of the older days, in his time, pre-flood, they potentially would have had a person-to-person conversation with him. I'm not saying they did. We don't know that for sure, but he most likely, because of the long ages, he conversed with many of these people who had been there from the beginning. So you say, well, how could he know all these things from Adam onward? Well, that's because he got firsthand accounts of them. He wasn't reading something. He actually talked to these people. That's why he knew. So, and this knowledge was passed on to him. He passed it on to his three sons, and they took the knowledge into the world. And then as that knowledge, especially the knowledge of the mystery religions, was passed on, eventually the progeny left the understanding Noah had of God, and they started falling for these false gods again. So that's how it happened. And you say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." Well, I've heard it said God has no grandchildren. How many times have you seen that there's godly people and they have children? Maybe their children become Christians, but then they have children and their children fall away from the faith and follow cults and idols. It's a story as old as humanity. So I'm not believing that for us, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that's the natural way. So people gravitate toward evil because the sin is in the flesh, and their natural inclination is to follow evil and to worship evil. Also, at the same time, parallel to that is the God-sized hole in every heart, so that people they want to worship mankind, they're natural worshipers. They all worship something. You can go to the least reached tribe in the middle of Bongo, nobody's ever heard of. They have gods. So where did they get this idea of gods? Well, first of all, most of it was passed down, I'm saying, but also the fact that they have to have gods. It's as old as mankind. So, as the Bible makes clear, you either worship the true God or you're going to go after false gods. So that's how that goes. And of course, at this time, you say, "Oh, we're so technologically sophisticated. We're the best educated generation of all time. How can we go for the things that this seems to indicate?" Well, it's really quite easy because the imaginations of man are continually wicked, and his heart is deceitful and wicked. And many men say, like the crowd on the day Pilate brought Jesus before him, the people said, "We'll not have this man to rule over us." That spirit is still in the earth. John calls it the spirit of Antichrist. But the spirit of Antichrist ultimately will come to fruition in a man, the Antichrist. And he will also bring with him, or I should say, how should I put this? Propagate, instigate, formulate, progress the one world religion, which is in the earth now. You say, oh, well, where's that? Well, has anybody ever driven down a street and saw a Unitarian church? I don't know if there's one here, but when we were in Tallahassee, there was one there. So that's just one aspect of it. Theosophical society, all these things are one worldism structures and entities. Yes, ma'am.
Which I was just like really
Oh, I'm not shocked because it's like I'm saying, the amount of education doesn't in any way indicate the amount of real spirituality or heart for God, because heart for God and the qualification of being born again has nothing to do with intellect. There are people who mental capabilities are not maybe, they're not Einstein, let's put it that way. But God can get them saved, or they can be saved through the moving of the Holy Spirit. So, because God made it fair, if I was God, I might have said, yeah, okay, let's only get the brightest. If they got an IQ of 150, then they can get saved. If or I'm a sports guy, so if they are, super great athlete, then they're qualified. So then God would go to the baseball teams and the professional football teams and soccer, British football, and they go, okay, who's the greatest here? Okay, you're born again. You're in the kingdom. And I could go on. How about emotional? What the most emotional person would get into the kingdom? No, the only thing that qualifies people to get into the kingdom is faith, and faith comes from the inside of the man, who the person is in their spirit. So you can criticize what God does and how he does it, but the more I look at it, the more I realize how absolutely fair that is. Because you can say, I'm really smart, and we can go out and find, 1,000 people way smarter than you. We can look at the best athlete in the room. I don't know, maybe Hamid was the best athlete in the room. But it's a matter of I can find, some people that are probably better than he is at it. So God used a common denominator for salvation, which is absolutely fair and just. And that's enough on that topic. But we're going to read the scripture now. And look, honey, I'm getting to the scripture. It's only 20 minutes in. We're going to continue in 17, chapter 17, verse 6. I could see that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and witnesses for Jesus. I was utterly amazed at the sight of her. So this, most commentators believe, refers to the Roman Empire's persecution of Christians. So this is for the future, but also much of the imagery is pertaining or understood by the believers at that time because they were living it. 7. Why are you so amazed? Said the angel. I tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. So again, the beast is it's many things. The beast can refer to the Antichrist himself, but mainly the beast is the beast system. It's an entire worldwide system, one world government, one world dictatorship, one world religion, one world economy. That's the beast. And the woman, which was explained last week, is given as an image of a woman who has a glass of probably wine or alcohol, and she's decked out. She's very, very attractive, apparently. And we see her as an image of everything that's evil, but she's a religious figure. The word usually interprets itself if the entire context is examined, right? So again, like I was just saying, if you go back and look at the imagery, and also mainly that's referring to the 7 heads and 10 horns. That comes from the book of Daniel. So when these images like this are mentioned in the book of Revelation, they are interpreted back in Daniel. And as I've mentioned before, the 7 heads doesn't mean that there's some real creature entity with 7 heads. It's talking about what this represents, that it's clearly known that the 7 heads are 7 world empires, and the last one is the 7th. First, we have Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Media Persia, Greek, Roman, and many people call the seventh the revived Roman Empire. But it's going to be worldwide. It's not just going to be a Mediterranean governance. So that's what those mean. And the 10 horns refer to Daniel's chapter 2 statue with 10 toes. So the 10 horns are the 10 powers. I look at those as geographic world ruling centers or states around the world. I think there's a lot of evidence for that. Since the empire is a world empire, as we do, as the United States has done, you have states. Even in India, I work with a lot of Indians, and I forget, I think they have 15 states. But in other words, when you have a large area, or even if it was the old USSR, you would have many members that comprise this entity, like the USSR. So in the whole world to be governed is going to be governed by 10 zones. Maybe zones is a better way to look at it. And each of these is going to have a governor, a president, a ruler. And all these 10 of these are going to be under the little horn. The little horn is the one that will rule them. What's that Lord of the Rings thing? One ruler to rule them, whatever it was. I guess we don't have any Tolkien fans here. Okay. By the way, interesting thing, Tolkien was the fellow professor with C.S. Lewis, although we don't know that he ever became a Christian. Obviously, C.S. Lewis was an atheist who became a Christian. Most people have heard of him, but they were both professors together. Interesting story. Hey, pardon me?
Oh, it's one ring to rule them all.
Yeah, the ring is going to be the Antichrist. So yeah, I see. You've looked it up on your phone, didn't you? Oh, I knew it. We're gonna have to get a big insignia AI on him. That's I think AI is the mark. No, not really. It's AI is going to be just part of a big system. Like I said before, I work in the business, and it's just part of an overall technological integration that's happening and coming very quickly right now. Who knows where they're really at right now? You're never going to find out about it till years later. It's kind of like the Enigma machine in World War II. The fellow who and pretty much invented the modern art or science of cryptology. He helped invent, or I guess pretty much invented the cryptology machine that helped us win World War II. But nobody knew about it until way after World War II. And then, it was plain to everybody. But that had been in the works all during the entire war. And it's a big reason we won the war because we knew what the Nazis were up to. Big advantage. We knew their game plans. So it made all the difference. And as far as I was watching the special, as far as if I remember right, it said the Nazis never did know we had that machine. So that's kind of like who knows what kind of AI they have right now. I think they have some AI out there and behind the scenes that probably scared the pants off of you. Old expression, but at any rate, so it's coming quickly. But we're mainly talking about the integration of the religious system right now. The beast, verse 8, that you saw, it was and now is no more, but is about to come up. Okay, so who is the beast? If we're looking at these accurately as the seven empires, who was the beast head at that time? The Roman Empire, right? You see any Jesus movies, apostolic movies, whatever. I guess a lot of people watch The Chosen, I'm sure, and there you see a lot of Roman soldiers and figures because that was well known. But as I mentioned, each successive empire, from the Ark to the Sumerians, who were not mentioned in this succession of empires because they weren't quite called worldwide yet, but from the Egyptians all the way up to the Roman Empire, each empire, they transformed their gods into the next empire. They can transform their architecture and their concepts into the next. We have in the Java code, we have something called inheritance, where you build a class. In other words, it's a piece of code, and you can have children from that, and they then have something called inheritance, and they get that from us, right? When we die, our children get our inheritance. Well, each empire, as it came along, inherited all the aspects of the empire before it. So that's how that happens. So they knew what was, and now is no more. That's speculative, if you will, at this time, because they didn't know for sure, except the Word of God says it, that the empire, Roman Empire, would go away. And certainly enough, it went away around 500. It collapsed from within. It wasn't conquered by any particular warring tribe or state or group, but it collapsed from within. We had the Dark Ages, and then we had the revived Roman Empire, which really was just the Roman Catholic Church in a political religious form. And so, and they had the king, the Holy Roman Empire had a king and kings, but they never did become the actual Roman Empire. In other words, that didn't happen again. So now what he's saying here, but is about to come up. In other words, of course, in God's time, you know, days 1,000 years. So about to come up means tomorrow, which is another 1,000 years. So it's about to come up. In other words, in the end time prophecies, that Roman-like empire will come back again. It's not going to be the exact Roman Empire, but it's going to be like it in the sense that it's going to have control of its entire dominion and region, not just the Mediterranean Sea, but the world this time. So it's going to be bigger. Each one, by the way, was bigger and more fearsome than the one before. Roman Empire was the most fierce of all as far as their ruling and their capabilities to control everything. In fact, that's where fascist comes from. The Romans were fascist, and fascism was basically symbolized by a bundle of like grain, wheat, with a band around it and an axe in the middle. If you see that symbol, that's the symbol of fascism. So when the Nazis and the Mussolini came along, they used that same symbol because Hitler modeled himself after Mussolini. Mussolini was like 10 years before. So he modeled himself after that. And Mussolini's goal was to bring back the Roman Empire with him as Caesar. So and he used that symbol. And so when people talk about fascism, I think most of them, they know what the media says about it, but they don't know the real history where it came from. Fascism is the government style of the Roman Empire. So if you think about that, you got it correctly. So that's it. So the final empire then is going to be another fascist empire, but this time it's going to be worldwide. And of course, the main nature of the fascist empire is you had one guy, the Caesar, who ruled everything, and you had lieutenants. Fascism is the mafia on steroids. Okay, the mafia is mini me. Mafia is mini me fascism. So the mafia is arranged, and you look into it, they attempted or have done an arrangement of it. Their political structure and everything about it is modeled after the Roman Empire. So they have the capo, the head, they have the lieutenants, they have a whole military structure. So, but that's another point. So what we have here is the Roman Empire is coming back, but not in the same form, not limited to the Mediterranean, but out of the abyss and go into its destruction. Okay, so the beast is coming out of the abyss, it says. So there's many interpretations of that. Some people interpret that meaning that Judas will come back, because in Acts chapter 1, it says that Judas went on to his own special place. I personally don't agree with that. I don't think that's the correct interpretation, but I'm throwing it out there because you should know what some people believe about that. So the whole idea is that the beast is going to come out of the abyss. Of course, we know what the abyss is. That's the great gulf fixed between Abraham's bosoms and torments, and it's the lowest point of I know it's kind of an oxymoron when we say lowest point. The abyss has no bottom. So interestingly enough, Tartarus is the abode of the fallen angels who were locked up, but it seems to have an end point. But by definition, the abyss has no end point. So I'll leave that up to you, math scholars, to figure out how infinity can work in a limited state. At any rate, continuing on. So, and those who dwell on the earth, I call them earth dwellers from the Greek. The Greek actually does say dwell on the earth. So I call them earth dwellers, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Okay. So this is these verses like this is where we get the idea that people, those who are going to be saved, are predestined, whatever your belief there. There's some aspect here because it's saying that from the very beginning, before the world was even formed, the saints are written in the book of life. So God is an optimist. Every person is written in the book of life. If you're not in the book of life, then you're lost and dead. So the book of life is where you have to be written. And Jesus said to his disciples, I don't remember the exact context, but he said, it was about miracles and things. They were rejoicing about all these great things they were sent out to do. And he said, don't get excited about that. That's not the really important thing. I'm paraphrasing. It's the Bartee paraphrase. He's saying basically that you should be happy that your name is not blotted out. And it also says that further in the Revelation, those whose name is not blotted out. In other words, by the time you die, you are still in the book or you're blotted out. By the instant of your death, if you have not received Christ, your name is blotted out. And it's like Santa Claus. There's a good list and the naughty list, right? God is not a big Santa Claus, don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that, your name is in that book, you're going up, your name is blotted out, you're going down. All right. I mean, not being too flippant, but I mean, it's that simple. Okay. So we see that the whole world is going to marvel when they see the beast that was, that is not, and yet will be. If you don't understand the history of what I just discussed, that probably has no meaning to you because there is a meaning to it. The beast system was the Roman Empire, disappeared, but it's now reappearing, right? In fact, in 1957, they formed the Club of Rome, which a few people knew about. But the Club of Rome then became, by the 1980s, the European Common Market and what we call today the EU. So again, it's a case where there was an idea, they stated what they wanted to do, and behold, it exists, and we live with it every day. Constantly on the news, financial news, it will then, say something about the EU currency, something like that. So, the EU is the one of the world's predominant economic powers, but it's also a military force, although it was not intended to be, I don't think by the founders, because right now they're seeing about sending some troops into Ukraine from Europe. And of course, the EU is the main one that has to make that decision. So the EU is the governing and ruling body of Europe right now. Of course, if you remember Brexit, there's a big British concept of let's get out of the European Common Market called Brexit, British exit. And I'm not going to go too far into that, but the whole idea is obviously they wanted to get out from under the EU rule because it totally rules Europe. Verse 9, this calls for a mind with wisdom. Well, that leaves some people out, maybe me. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits. Okay, so it's commonly believed that this is talking about the headquarters or center of the beast system, which makes sense. In seminary, we were taught to always look at the context. Who is saying it? Who is it being said to? What is the context? What's it for? And so this whole pericope, the series of verses that are contiguous and logical, are all talking about this woman and this system. And now it's telling you, and keep in mind, the Holy Spirit wrote this, dictated by Jesus himself, but at the same time, these images were veiled to protect the followers from the Romans. Because if he'd come right out and said who this was, then the Romans would have gotten a hold of this And of course, then a lot of people would have died. So look at that however you will. I think it's God's foreknowledge and omniscience and power that he, through the Holy Spirit, uh, conveyed this in symbolism, which is the only way to contiguously through time, give it meaning. So God, the whole Revelation, keep in mind, he's given it to a first century man, more like a caveman than us, in the sense of their lifestyle and how they lived. And so he gave them something that would have to appeal to or be understood by 21st century people. Nobody else could do that. Nobody, no being, entity, or great genius of man could ever do that. Only God can give us something through 2,000 years that still has meaning, actually more meaning than when it was written. So as we continue on here, we see the woman sits on 7 hills. And the 7 hills were clearly known at that time. I know there's been people, and I mean, there's some factualness to it, who have pointed out there's other cities in the world now that we know are founded on 7 hills. Okay, well, we come from Tallahassee, and Lisa's where we met, and she grew up, and her father built a house on one of the tallest hills there, San Luis Mission Ridge, where the Spanish built the mission there a long time ago. And but Tallahassee is founded on 7 hills. You're probably not going to hear that in the news. Well, my point is there's a lot of cities around the world. Maybe now, with hindsight, you can go and look and say, oh, well, 7 hills, that must be Tallahassee. God, give me a break. We know Tallahassee. It's not Tallahassee. I want to tell you right now. But at any rate, the thing is that in those days, if you went to Joseph Romanus, and you went up to him and you said, "City on 7 hills, what do you think that is?" You'd only get one answer. You'd have no debate. They all knew what that was. That was the nickname of Rome. That was, you know, you know, the city of the White House. Go ask me, where's the city of the White House? Oh, I don't know, never heard of that. Now everybody say, Washington, what are you, crazy? Same thing. They would all say, we know exactly where this is. This is Rome. So the scripture through Jesus, through the Holy Spirit, is pinpointing for us not only what the beast system is going to be, the character of it, but where it's going to be. So it's going to be Rome. And is it going to be the current Roman Catholic Church? I do not think so. There are a lot of expositors that believe that. I don't think that's it. I think that when all the believers are gone, then there'll be no believers in the Catholic system. And at that point, evil will totally take it over. So the Catholic Church, which is already, trying to make Islam, put Islam and Christianity together, will put all religions together, and he'll rule from there. So the Catholic structure, not the church of believers, but the Catholic structure will, I think, morph into this one world religion. It'll no longer be Roman Catholicism. It'll actually be something totally different. But the structure will be used to merge all these other belief systems, which we're already starting to see a direction going that way. Yes, sir.
The earlier verse 3, I mentioned this last week, is that it talks about it being in the wilderness, and scripturally the wilderness is either unpopulated and area desolate and lack of precipitation, and Rome gets like 30 inches rain.
Well, the reference to the wilderness has this. He's giving you the exact geographic coordinate here, so it has nothing to do with verse 3.
There are other, I mean, what you're saying is the major interpretation.
Absolutely.
There are some others, like the predators who look at most, if you most of it's, they look at Jerusalem, right? That's
There's other opinions, and I hand that to you.
Some look at Mecca too, as
Right.
as being the focus. And
That's only come about in the last decade or two because of our news focus on Islam. Before that, nobody believed that. I mean, look at your history. I've studied it. Nobody would have come up with that interpretation. So let's continue on, but I appreciate your input. So we're going to continue on, and we're going to look at the fact that what we have is, in verse 10, 7 kings 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. Keep in mind, in this time period when they're writing, kings were simply the rulers of a state or a geographic area. Kings would then apply to the Caesars. The Caesar was actually a king. Interesting. We used to watch it on TV, a dog person whose name was Caesar, and I've heard it quite a bit. There are many. Caesar is simply Spanish for Caesar, in case you missed that. So, I don't, I don't think I've ever met an Anglo named Caesar, but it's possible. But for some reason in the Hispanic community, Caesar is probably because it was meant to be a ruler or a king or a great one. So you name your child Caesar so he could become a great one. Same like when Islam, they name their kids Muhammad so they can become great like Muhammad. That's the way people are. But at any rate, continue on. What we're going to see is that 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come, the revived Roman Empire. And when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. Thank you, Lord. Let there be light. Okay. We will proceed with a little darkness. Don't work. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. Okay, here we go. Anyway, so we see that in verse 11, the beast that was and now is not is an eighth king. This is referring back to the little horn of Daniel. The little horn of Daniel is part of the prophecy of the 7 and the 10, the 7 heads and 10 horns. So the little horn is that one leader who comes out of these powers, these 10 global powers I mentioned, the 10 horns. And so out of one of them is going to come this Antichrist, the actual Antichrist figure. And another name, appellation for Antichrist is the little horn of Daniel. So if you hear that, just think Antichrist, capital A, okay? Not an Antichrist, but the actual person. Okay, and so we're going to see that he belongs to the 7, is going into destruction. Well, as the scripture in Daniel and other places predicts, he's going to and also in where is it? 2 Timothy 2, I believe, where it talks about the fact that 2 Thessalonians 2, where it talks about the Antichrist going in perdition. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive 1 hour of authority as kings along with the beast. Hour or in the Greek can mean, usually it doesn't actually mean an hour like we have it. They didn't have wristwatches. They didn't have clocks. They didn't know what an hour was, right? They had sundials. Okay. And, if you're rich, like some town, maybe the town would have one sundial in the middle of the town. That's it. A really rich Caesar had a sundial. Most people didn't, they didn't have like the cartoons I've seen, a little wristwatch with little spikes sticking up, they'd hold it up and it would show them what time it was by the sun. That's not how it worked. So hour in the Greek can mean a certain length of time. It can mean, in some sense, the division that we might roughly call an hour. But in general, prophetically, it usually means a particular amount of time. So the kings have one purpose. They're going to, rule for a certain amount of time, which we know is going to be 7 years, right? Limited time, to yield their power and authority to the beast. So one out of these 10 power brokers, these 10 governors of the world system, one of them is going to arise. And the way it looks like, not necessarily one of them, but the little horn comes out of one of the horns. In other words, out of one of these geographic areas, we're going to see the little horn come out. And that is a man who is going to, as the word says, speak great things and blasphemies against the Holy One. 14, and they will make war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and he will be accompanied by his called and chosen and faithful ones. That's a picture of Revelation 19 we're going to get to probably next semester. But so when Jesus comes back, he's the lamb and the lion. He's going to come back with the visage of a lamb. His robe is stained in blood, and he has the marks As it says in Zechariah 12:10, they'll look upon him whom they pierced. They're going to know it's him. So he's the lamb coming back, but he's coming back as a lion, all powerful. His eyes are blazing fire. Out of his mouth is a sharp sword, and all of his enemies will be totally vanquished. I believe instantaneously. I don't think he has to work at it. It's like one word and they're gone, That's God. That's what God can do. And the angel said to me, the waters you saw, again, the waters always mean Gentile powers. The land refers to the Holy Land. And the waters you saw where the prostitute was seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. In other words, the whole world. The water represents the Gentile world, the non-Israeli, non-Israel world. And the 10 horns and the beast that you saw will hate the prostitute. Well, they're going to ride the prostitute, or the prostitute's going to ride them, I should say. That's the image, going to ride them to power. In other words, for the first 3.5 years, these rulers of the world will be under the rule of Antichrist, the man, not the one who is the full-blown Antichrist yet. Yes, sir.
Could you help, I guess, with the timing, because you just said 3.5 years, but yet 1 hour in a day is equal to 7 years. So is it really 7 times 24 times 365 to kind of get to?
Well, no, it's not even that. What it is sometimes it's spoken of differently. We know that the tribulation is 7 years. We know that the Antichrist is going to rule these world systems for 7 years.
7 human.
But yeah, 7 actual years. But you have to limit the first half from the second half. Even people that have differing views make a discrimination before the character of the first 3.5 and the character of the second 3.5. Yes, sir. Yes.
The 7 years that they will rule in reference relative to Revelation 11:2, as it talks about that they will measure the court outside the temple, but leave that out for the given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. 42 months, obviously
3.5 years. That's the last half of the tribulation. That's why we have 2 witnesses coming. Nobody else can stand before Pharaoh, as I've said before. It's like Pharaoh and Janus and Jamre and Moses and Aaron. In other words, nobody will be able to stand before him, because anybody who says anything against him will be instantly killed. So
you get the 7 years. So obviously, the
7 years. 7 years is from. You have to look at. You have to look at Daniel 9:27 and 24 through 27. Shabbalah in Hebrew, the 7-year period, and they're going to rule for 7 years. There's going to be a 7-year tribulation. That's clearly established. I don't know any expositor that doesn't believe that. In other words, it really believes the Bible. There's preterists, but they don't believe anything. So it doesn't matter what they believe; they're not even saved. So, but that's the way that is. Let's continue on. So what we have here is that these kings are going to rule in the first 3.5 years and onward. In other words, when Antichrist comes to rule, he's not going to get rid of his governmental structure. They're going to be there through the entire time period. The difference is Antichrist himself is the big difference. He's just a man with great intelligent man who's ruling things through his human capabilities, supposedly. But in the last 3.5 years, he's inhabited or influenced by Satan. And then he becomes a full-blown big A Antichrist. And at that point in time, that's what we were just referring to. That's when everybody's killed. They flee for the desert, Petra, or wherever they're going. And what happens at that point is no one can stand before him. If anybody says anything against him, their goon squad is sent out to kill them. So just same thing in Egypt, right? None of the Egyptians, I love that 10 Commandments, none of the Egyptians would dare go before Pharaoh. The only 2 guys who could go before Pharaoh are the 2 guys who could not be killed, as it says here. It says if any man try to hurt them, they will be hurt. And that they're basically they are immortal, and I shouldn't say that, it's not the right word. They're protected by God. Nothing can happen to them for the 3.5 years until, like Jesus, until the end of the 3.5 years, they're killed. Nothing could happen to Jesus until his mission was done. Then he was killed. It's the same concept. So they are speaking against Antichrist. They're telling the world what he really is, and they find that that the world hates them more and more until in the very end they have satanic Christmas. They kill them. They lay in the streets, and they celebrate. And then the 2 witnesses, guess what, are resurrected and go to heaven. And That's all, folks. That's the end of the ball game. That's the day Jesus comes back. So that's what happens there. And the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So the woman again is the one world religious system. It's that great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Apparently, this is Rome, the city of the seven hills. In other words, for the first 3.5 years, Antichrist is ruling from the one world government center. And it says in Daniel 11 and other places that at the very end, he's going to put his tents, or they're going to come against him in Jerusalem in the valley of Jehoshaphat, Armageddon. So the thing is, we know where he is. So apparently what happens is his headquarters is in Rome for the first 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years, he will go into the rebuilt temple. He's the guy that let him rebuild the temple. He will go into the rebuilt temple, sit in there and say, I am God. At that point, he stays there. He doesn't go back to Rome. Rome, in fact, is destroyed. He has to destroy it because it has too much power. So the first thing he does, it's like when Hitler came to power, first thing he does, take over the Reichstag, and anybody who was against him, he immediately goes out and kills them all. Study World War II if you don't believe me. So it's the same thing. He used them. He used Hindenburg and all the great rulers of Germany to get into power without firing a shot. He ruled through their obeisance, through their ability to back him and give him power. And then when he finally became the big Hitler, the big H, they're dead. He gets rid of all the same thing. So the whore of Babylon, some people call this lady figure, is going to be destroyed. And at that point, he's going to move his headquarters. And the reason is he's going into the temple to say, I'm God. God lives where the temple is. If you go on and say, where's my God? Where's Zeus? You go to the temple of Zeus. If you want to say, where is the Antichrist God? You have to go to his temple in Jerusalem. His headquarters is Jerusalem. And when Armageddon happens, that's where he is. He's not in Rome. Rome essentially at the middle point when he says, I'm God, Rome is eliminated. The religious system, not the Roman Catholic Church. Because at that point, it's not the Roman Catholic Church. At that point, it's a one world religion. It's morphed into something totally different. So that's what's going to happen there. And the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute was seated are peoples of multitudes and nations of tongues. It's the world. And the 10 horns and the beast that you saw will hate the prostitute. Why? Because they had to answer. It's like, you know why we had the Reformation? Because the Roman Catholic Church ruled Europe. And so the kings of Germany, particularly Germany, but others, decided we got to find a way to throw the yoke of the Roman Catholic Church in Rome off of us. And then they found a feisty little monk who was going to do it for them. And they backed him and they protected him in their castles. And then Martin Luther became the pawn of them so that they could throw off the yoke of the Catholic Church, the spiritual Roman Empire, and then start to rule Europe. After Martin Luther came in the Reformation, the kings then started to rule Rome instead of the clergy. So it's the same exact thing happening here. Okay, so as we go on, we're going to see that that they are going to desolate, make her naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So however that's going to happen, the city of Rome and all of its structures are going to be destroyed at this point in time in the middle. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by uniting to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. This means not just that he is, the Antichrist is governing them, but that he is total dictator. He's Caesar. He becomes Caesar at that point. And the one world religion and his government of the first 3.5 years is then morphed into a total dictatorship. He's not a dictator for the first 3.5 years. He's a great guy, like the current, whoever's the head of the EU right now. They change him like underwear. I don't know who the guy is. But anyway, I'm just sad, it's like that. And the woman you saw is a great city that rules over the kings of the earth. And of course, we know within the context, he's already told us where it is. He's given us the Google Maps coordinates. We know exactly where the city is. It's not in the desert somewhere. It's not in America. It's not New York. People try to make it New York. It has nothing to do with New York or the United States for that matter. Anyway, I couldn't get to the rest of it because I talked too much. But I was just going to, something a professor, head of the seminary, showed me one time. I thought it was fascinating, but you'll get the slides. So basically, I made a chart just showing there's two types of religions in the world. There is the revealed religion, which is linear, and then there's the old pagan religions, which are all circular. Yin Yang, Taoism is a perfect example. So there's only two revealed religions that are real, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. They're linear. They start and they have an end. And then Islam is the pseudo religion. It is the false monotheism. And it also is linear, but it's the satanic counterfeit. And then on the right side, you have all the other religions, and my first degree was in religions and comparative philosophies. And it's all true. These are all circular. Of course, the most obvious, Lion King is one of these pagan circular religions. Okay, but everybody knows that. The circle of life, that's the greatest lie there is. There is no circle of life. Hebrews says, for man, you live, there's once to die in the judgment. That's revealed religion. The truth is revealed and linear. All of these, Hinduism, Taoism, Shinto, form of Buddhism, and animism, the oldest religion, which is just you see everything around you as a god, a spirit. American Indians were spiritists, animists. So I'm going to worship the eagle spirit. That's what a bunch of nonsense. You know, we have educated people in this country today thinking that the Indian religion is something they should emulate. How ridiculous can you get? You know, I'm going to worship the buffalo spirit. I don't think so. But at any rate, I'm trying to paint something here because the religion that's going to come about is not going to be rooted from the true linear religion. It will be from the false linear religion of Islam and from the circular, most primitive and oldest religion, which is Spiritism, animism, morphed into many gods, Hinduism, morphed into Buddhism, Lord Gautama's religious eightfold path, and then, of course, variants like Shintos and others. But every religion that is false is circular, except for one, and that's Islam, which is linear, but that's because Satan needed a counterfeit, mainly of the Old Covenant. So what was for the Jews? Muhammad decided the Arabs needed their own religion and made a false Old Covenant called Islam. On that, honey?